Welcome to episode 4 of the Necronama.com. Today, before we begin, I want to tell you a little story. This is not an urban legend. This is reality. It began in Chicago on April 22nd, 1987, when 52-year-old Ruthie Mae McCoy was murdered by someone who entered her 11th floor apartment through the bathroom cabinet somewhere between 8:50 and 9:05 p.m. We know this because McCoy called 911 at 8:45 to report that someone in the apartment next door was trying to come in through her bathroom cabinet. The call was noted as a disturbance with the neighbor rather than a breaking and entering, which caused the police to not react as quickly as they could have. 2 more calls came through to 911, with reports of screaming and gunshots coming from McCoy's apartment. Police were dispatched and arrived approximately 10 to 15 minutes later. Their knocks went unanswered, and police attempted to enter the apartment using a key given to them by the attendant in the housing office, but they just left when that key failed to open the door. The next evening, 911 received a call from McCoy's neighbor, who was worried and very concerned about her whereabouts, considering that she had seen police at the door the night before, and still had not seen her good friend McCoy, who stopped by every single day at least once. Chicago police and the Chicago Housing Authority security guards arrived back at McCoy's apartment. After knocks and calls went unanswered, officers suggested breaking the door down, but they were cautioned not to by the CHA security guards. They were told that if they did, they would have to pay to have somebody come and fix the door. So they just left. The next evening, a CHA official arrived at McCoy's door with a carpenter who drilled the lock on the door. Ruthie McCoy was found lying on her bedroom floor. She'd been shot 4 times, once in the left shoulder, once in the left thigh, the right side of her abdomen, and her right upper arm. She did not die instantly. She bled out. 2 men, Edward Turner and John Hondras, were charged with the murder, home invasion, armed robbery, armed violence, and residential burglary. After 2 years of trial, due to lack of evidence, the 2 men were let go. Ruthie McCoy's murder remains unsolved. I am James Sabata, author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now.
And hello, I'm Don Guillory, historian, author, and co-host as well. So what's on the menu for today, James?
Today is CANDYMAN.
Not that horrible song from Christina Aguilera, right?
No, and not the fun song from Willy Wonka either.
All right, since we're talking about CANDYMAN, I guess we got to talk about urban legends and all the stuff that goes in with that. What place they have in society, why we believe them, why they kind of persist. So, James, you want to start us off?
Well, I feel like for myself, my mom was huge into these and used them as almost like a lesson to be safe out there. Like, her favorite one she brought up all the time was the headlights. If you see somebody with their headlights off, don't flash your lights at them because those are gang members in an initiation. They're going to flip around and come and kill you. And number one, I never understood why that would even be a thing. Like, that is the weirdest way to pick your victims. But also just, I don't know how this like permeated culture so hard that even in the movie Urban Legend, they do this scene because it was so ingrained in culture that this would happen. And it's such a terrible, terrible thing to tell people because you're like, don't worry about that car that doesn't have its headlights on. Let them keep going and let them be the ones to die instead of you.
Yeah, and you know what? That Urban Legend I had no idea about until I saw the movie. And strangely enough, after I saw the movie, we were coming back, going back to my apartment or wherever I was in college. Car passed by me, and I think my girlfriend at the time, headlights were out. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, nope, not flashing. Not flashing. I just saw the movie. I'm not going to become a victim. And just kind of how quickly, and it wasn't even a joking thing, it's just how quickly I became wrapped up in that, even to this day, where I'm not going to go ahead and test it. Maybe somebody is actually going to be out there leaving their headlights off just in the hopes that somebody flashes them, and then that becomes their marked prey. I guess urban legends, myths that have come up before, this guy with the hook and the popular one when I was a kid had to deal with pop rocks, and the person who was the victim always changed, and it had to deal, for those of you who don't know what pop rocks are, it's basically this carbonated candy where you eat it and it pops in your mouth. According to the urban legend, you're not supposed to drink soda, and even within the legend, the soda changes. Sometimes it's Coke, sometimes it's Pepsi, sometimes it's some other random soda, but the fate is always the same. The person decides on a dare to eat the Pop Rocks and then drink the soda, and his stomach explodes. And so for me, that was always one of these things I listened to. I'm like, man, if I'm eating my Pop Rocks, I'm not drinking soda with it. I'm not gonna explode. I think one story, it was the kid who was on Leave It to Beaver. Another one was like another child star that no one had heard from in a while, just because they weren't doing anything prominent. And you also have to factor in, this is the 80s. You didn't have the internet where you could easily access, or at least easily counter, any of the death hoaxes that are out there, which seem to come up just about every week. But with that one, I mean, it was weird, it was creepy. It was one of these ways to kind of freak people out. And another one that I remember, and it really became prominent because of the internet, was with the spiders in your mouth. The number was something like, every year people swallow 17 spiders or 200. It was always a changing number. But you swallow so many spiders in your sleep. And what it turned out to be was, it was a study done by someone to determine how quickly people will disseminate a lie without fact checking it. So he created this, went on the internet, people believed it, shared it with one another, and it kept going. Same thing as with those chain letters. You get a chain letter or chain email now.
Oh man, I forgot about chain letters.
I can't remember what the limit was, but you were supposed to die if you did not respond or did not forward the letter or forward the email. You're supposed to die within a week or 24 hours or something. Or sorry, you had to forward or mail it within 24 hours, and if you didn't, you'd end up dying. The crazy thing about all these different types of urban legends that you have, it's all based off of fear of something. It could just be this fear of, this unknown that's out there, ghost stories, this idea that, if you pick up a hitchhiker, you're going to get killed, or if you stop to make out with your girlfriend or your boyfriend, that, some crazy killer is going to come and get you.
The guy with the hook. Yeah.
All these creepy things are that are surrounded with controlling your behavior. I mean, I guess the Pop Rocks thing, it could be an issue of gluttony and excess, or just trying to stop you from eating candy as a kid, which is a pretty hard thing to do when you're a kid.
Or a 40-year-old man.
Hey, I'm not going to tell on ourselves. Or even something like Bloody Mary, which I never got. And I'd heard this story before, but I'd never been around people that, this was a real story that people passed on to one another. In fact, when you and I were prepping for the show, you had asked me about, if there were any black urban legends, specifically black urban legends, and I honestly couldn't think of any. There are like superstitions. There are kind of old wives' tales and practices that are out there. For me, the one that popped up first had to deal with whenever there's a thunderstorm. My grandfather, when he was alive and I would go visit during the summers, if there was a thunderstorm, you had to turn every appliance off, TV was off, you weren't allowed to talk, you basically had to sit there and be quiet.
Why couldn't you talk?
He had this belief that God was talking through the lightning and thunder, and that you're going to be interrupting him, so you better be quiet and listen to him. And my cousins and I would just sit there and wait for the rain to pass so we could turn the Nintendo back on.
I got a princess to save, buddy. She's in another castle, and I need to get there.
But, even delving deeper, I started looking at other stuff. In the military, there are a lot of urban legends, a lot of myths, because people know someone who had been in before that tells them something, and then that gets passed on to the next unit. They get passed down to the next class that starts. And the one that I got passed around a lot in mine when I was in basic training was that the military put saltpeter in all the food so that if you're a recruit, a cadet, whatever, that you do not get any erections or sexual thoughts while you're in training. Just to spend all your energy on training, on physical fitness. No sexual thoughts, no sexual desires should be coming up. and people were passing around this myth that it was in the food. Even the one that I thought was, well, for me, I thought was funny, but it was my favorite, had to deal with Mr. Rogers, which most of us around our age group, we grew up with Mr. Rogers. When I was in the military, even the TAC officers, the NCOs, the actual the commissioned officers that were in charge of us would pass around this same lie. And it was the fact is, from their estimation, the fact that Fred Rogers was a Vietnam Special Forces sniper. The reason why he wore the sweaters and long sleeve cardigans and long sleeve shirts was because he was hiding his tattoos that included his kill count, so that people watching the show would not be turned off by this guy with these sleeve tattoos.
I don't know how that would stop it, though, because he always wore his necklace of ears from his enemies. Yeah. So
that's why things were, things were put together so well in make-believe land. But yeah, there were all these theories out there. In fact, when they started giving us our gear, there would be a little Bible that was given to us as well, or at least some of us took it. And what the person was telling us who gave us these Bibles, these little pocket Bibles, was, well, and it's always a different war, it's always a different explanation. But if you put this Bible right here, right next to your heart where your pocket is, it'll stop a bullet. And we know that because we've got numerous cases in which a soldier had been shot by the enemy only to have the bullet stopped by his pocket Bible.
Why don't they just sew Bibles together and make a jacket out of them then?
It would have made a whole lot more sense. And it would have weighed probably less than what it did now. What the IBAs weigh. But yeah, other stuff that's come up, Bloody Mary, where you say it, I think, 3 times, say Bloody Mary into a mirror 3 times, or a dark hallway or something. And
3 times in a mirror.
Okay. Well, and she's supposed to come and visit you and kill you as a response, which is a weird thing. The weirdest urban legend or urban myth that I could find when I was doing this search had to deal with Church's Chicken, which, of course, this past week, Popeyes has been, past couple of weeks, Popeyes Chicken has been getting so much free advertising from people fighting over the chickens.
They're getting free advertising right now.
This episode is brought to you by Popeyes Chicken Sandwich.
If they want to cut a deal with me where we do that every episode and they give me those chicken sandwiches, I will do it.
Hey, I'm there for it. I couldn't get one yesterday because the line was wrapped around the building.
Good Lord. Continue.
But just the idea that within the chicken wars, prior to 2019, but back in the 80s, and maybe this is coupled with, Reagan's America, with the 2 Americas and Forgotten People and all this other stuff. But there was an urban legend that went around within the black community that Church's Chicken had been bought out by the KKK and was putting additives into the food to make black people sterile. Now, you've got so many things, and this will get into kind of the racial elements when we start talking about Candyman, but you have so many layers of race and racism thrown in there. Like, why do you have to do it to the chicken? I mean, then you're going ahead and compounding that with the black people and chicken stereotype. Then it's the KKK, so you have to believe that it's the KKKs that's doing this. I don't understand why they didn't, buy out KFC and just change it to KKKFC. Maybe that would have been too much on the nose.
In fairness, they do have a plantation owner as their mascot.
It makes so much more sense, right? But bought out churches, they were putting additives or poisons in the food to sterilize black people. Because they were reproducing too much, so you got to stop them from reproducing in order to cut down on the welfare rolls or whatever other types of archaic beliefs that they had. And the best way to get towards black people, or at least affect black people, is by poisoning their chicken. All right, which brings us to Candyman.
Well, and I mean, even Bloody Mary brings us to Candyman because it's very similar. It's very similar in that you're looking into a mirror, saying Candyman 5 times, and then he comes through and kills you.
Do we want to talk about the problems with it, or do we want to talk about the movie?
Let's do both.
Okay.
Where do you want to start?
I'll start with the problem. All right. Full disclosure, I did not watch Candyman up until this past summer. I knew enough about it to where it wasn't that appealing to me when I was younger. The movie was out. I mean, it was a horror movie, and there were so many people I went to school with who watched it and talked about it. I pretty much knew the film. But when I watched it, I was a little bit biased. One, because it's been 27 years since the movie came out. Mm-hmm. And technology has changed, story writing has changed, even our view on horror has changed. So as I'm watching it, one, I'm not expecting that much. And then two, I'm expecting more, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Because the film itself disappointed me with the aspect of, you've got Candyman, which you find out more of his backstory in the second film. But you've got this man who had been lynched. You know, I don't even think they used the term lynch. They just describe how he had his hand cut off, was replaced with a hook. Then he had honey smothered all over him, and he was basically stung to death.
Can I tell you how much that bothers me? Like, you don't attract bees with honey. Like, you can, but there's so many more effective ways of going about this, like mixing sugar and water, for instance, or covering him in flowers would have done a better job.
Yeah. And it was just, for me, I was glad that they went with the angle, or at least a historic angle, to explain why this guy exists. But I did not like the way that the execution of who he was, as far as I guess a horror icon or just a scary boogeyman, takes place, because his ashes are strewn in this one area that ends up becoming the Cabrini Green projects in Chicago. And so he terrorizes this community of poor black and brown people in the south side of Chicago, or actually the projects of Chicago. And he's taking action against them. For me, it's unsettling, because the way that we looked at horror is typically about the quote unquote villain. It's about them getting back at the people that wronged them, or at least people that are similar to the folks that wronged them. Whereas it wasn't, at this time, because I guess it would have been during the Reconstruction period. It wouldn't have been the free blacks in that area, or free people who had moved into that area. It was white property owners, people with some means, who did not like the fact that the character, or the individual who becomes Candyman, had a romance with a white woman, and she bore his child. So again, you got all these elements and layers there that have to deal with racial politics, miscegenation, property ownership, freedom of movement, access, like all these things that are going on. But when Candyman comes back, he's just attacking this black community, which for me, or terrorizing the black community. For me, it seems wrong, even to say that, his ashes are there, so that's where he's going to be located. When you have the second film and you realize he's not bound just to the Cabrini Green projects, he could be wherever somebody mentions him.
Okay, so that's always been one of my biggest problems with this film. He's stuck there of all places, and then he's murdering poor black people. It's where it takes place. It's where he's called to. So in that regard, you can kind of make an exception for it, because it is a white woman who thinks, that's where he's at, that's where I have to go. She goes there and she says Candyman 5 times, and she unleashes him in the projects. So on the one hand, and I'm speaking for writers with no idea if this is what they were thinking, but to me, I feel like they wrote it in a way where you were supposed to think that he's stuck there, like that was probably their intention with the first one. Then when they wanted to do a sequel, then it became okay to move him around, and they had just accidentally built this great way into it to explain it, where it's wherever he's called to. So I think you get both in that regard.
Now, despite what I don't like about the film, I like that Candyman, at least trying to look at this in a 1990s lens, is a really creepy dude. He's not cutting the jokes, and I love Freddy Krueger, but he's not cutting the jokes like Freddy Krueger is doing. And he's not trying to be funny. It's simply, you need to know who I am so I can continue living. As long as I have people who are scared of me, I'm going to continue existing. And once people are no longer scared of it, kind of like Pennywise from It, as long as you're scared of him, he can feed off of that. But if you're not, he has no purpose. He has no reason to be there. And for a character like Pennywise and even for Candyman, they need to be creepy. They need to be scary, because if I look at you and like, oh my God, this dude is hilarious, I take the power away from him. But even with Freddy, the jokes he's cracking aren't simply the ones where, the people he's chasing down are going to laugh. For him, it's for the audience. As cheesy as some of the jokes are, as bad as some of the jokes are, you still sit there and you're like, you know what? I kind of like this guy as a bad guy. I don't want to, because in all honesty, if it were my dreams, I'd probably be shitting shitting the bed every night that Freddy shows up. Because if somebody's chasing you down and they're making jokes when they're doing it, not a good situation. But at least for Candyman's character, what I like is he's, at least in that first film, there's enough mystery behind him that you're not learning that much about him until Virginia Madsen's character's learning about him.
Well, I think number one, Tony Todd's performance is just phenomenal. He is so fantastic as Candyman. But also, I think that the writers really did well with trying to throw you off. Like, is there somebody that's using this urban legend to kill people? Like an actual human. And so you kind of didn't get the real Candyman for a while, And I think that's a real strength of the movie, as much as I don't like some of the movie. But I think that that's such a strength of that question of what's really happening. And it also plays really well into the narrative of her having to uncover everything that's happening.
Even towards the end of the film, when she crawls out of the fire pit with the baby and she's all burned up and the baby's safe, Candyman's legacy can continue on because people are, the kid thinks he sees Candyman in the fire, then I'm sorry, in the pile of wood, and then sets fire to it. So there's the idea of like, oh, there's Candyman, we got to get him. Ends up burning the woman. Now, of course, Candyman's perspective is like, no, we're going to die here together. We're going to be together forever. This is going to be great. It's going to work out. But just the fact that she dies there, the murders can then be pinned on her. So if you're on the outside, you're seeing this take place, and it was this crazy woman who had been coming back to the projects back and over and over again. She was doing all this stuff. It becomes that thing of the myth becomes wrapped up within itself, to where this woman was so connected to this thing, she felt she had to kill. So now it's no longer an issue of Candyman's this far off guy. Candyman could be anybody who gets obsessed with the story of Candyman. It could be your neighbor and same time tomorrow, they could be, coming through your mirrors or your medicine cabinet to try and kill you.
That's what Ruthie McCoy would tell us.
Outside the film, it makes you think about any real killers, even when you get into things like copycat killers. The idea that they're doing it for the thrill or for the rush or just this need to kill for whatever reason. But you also have the actual killer is gaining more notoriety by having those deaths and those murders take place, because they're not going to look at her and say, oh, it was this random white woman who was doing this. They're going to do it, she was inspired by Candyman, and then that person then becomes known as the Candyman killer or whatever other types of cool media nicknames that somebody might get.
Well, and I think that really permeates all three films. He's always setting it up where somebody else can take the blame. I used to really dislike that, because from a plot point of view, I was like, if you're trying to make people remember you so that you can stay alive, why do you keep pinning it on others? But as I've gotten older, I kind of get that having that authority of this person did it actually fuels the urban legend parts. Because then you're like, yeah, that's what they said, but here's what really happened, right, man.
And it's a good cover. I mean, it's a good way to have that legend live on, because no one's ever going to accept the story. And especially when you hear a story from the news, and you'll have people who are skeptical of what the news what the official story may be, either released from the news, from the police, whatever, and you kind of question, like, there's got to be more to this. There's, this person has to be taking the fall for somebody else.
If I look at what I dislike most about Candyman, it would be the fact that he doesn't understand that he's not the scariest thing happening there. There's so much other murder and so many, like, you got gangs involved, you got all this other stuff that was happening in the Cabrini projects, and the reality of this situation is so much scarier than Candyman is. And I almost feel like you could make a really good parody skit of that. Like he shows up and then everybody's like, yeah, so what? You know, like,
yeah, you got a hook, I got a gun.
Exactly. And I feel like Candyman would have been a million times stronger in a white neighborhood, like especially the suburbs, you know, just unleashed in this area where everybody feels safe instead. Because I feel like Cabrini Green, anybody who knows anything about what was happening there, I feel like everybody there would already be played out on terror almost. Not that you ever get totally used to it, but you don't need urban legends. Like, you have enough reality.
Yeah, because a ghost story is not going to get you.
And you have, like, they have that gang member that's basically copying Candyman to kind of throw you off in the film. And I would have liked to see a lot more of that. Like, not necessarily him, but just, like, the other violence happening around her. And even having her, like, wondering, is Candyman behind this? Or, like, does it fuel it somehow? And that kind of thing. But yeah, I just think it would have been way stronger in a white neighborhood where, you know, soccer moms feel safe and one of them's drunk and doing it in the mirror instead.
And that brings us to, you know, the comment, or at least the discussion you and I had earlier when you were asking that question about urban legends that are specific to black culture. As I thought about it, I just realized, you know, there's little superstitious things, little myths, old wives' tales, whatever. But there's nothing to the level of something like, that I can recall, that's to the level of Bloody Mary, the guy with the hook, the vanishing hitchhiker, the headlights, anything like that, unless you get deeper into ethnicity. So if you're talking about, you know, within Haitian culture, Creole culture, Jamaican, you know, you get into, or even West Africans that resettle in the United States, you get into that specific cultural legends and myths that may come up. As far as within Black America, there's enough history, at least in the United States, you know, just within the 20th century, well, even just within the 21st century, to where you can look at what's, you know, going on in the news or social media, to where you don't need to be told any crazy urban legend or myth. The urban legend or myth that you might have might be within a neighborhood, and some kids say, hey, you know, that creepy house at the end of the block, oh, you know, this guy killed his entire family, or this mom killed her entire family, and you know, that's kind of it. It's not anything that's become widespread within, or at least that I've seen within Black culture and Black history, where there would be that discussion of this mythical being that has no grounding. The stories would come up like, you know, be careful when you're driving at night. And I remember Colin Powell discussed this back when he was stationed, I think, at Fort Benning, but he was changing duty stations, and it was his first assignment. He wasn't from the South. He was in uniform, and he talks about he was driving a VW Bug. It was, you know, the highways that he was taking. He gets pulled over by a sheriff or a sheriff deputy, or it might have been the highway patrol, but he gets pulled over, and the person pulling him over asks him, like, you know, hey, you're in the military? He's like, yeah, you know, and he has his uniform on, and he looks at him, and he tells him, he's like, you know, it was a white police officer who pulled me over, and he gave me advice that I hadn't thought about before. And he told Colin Powell, a young Colin Powell, I think second lieutenant or first lieutenant at the time, get off the road as soon as possible, find a hotel or a motel to stay in, because you don't want to travel these roads at night, especially in uniform. And still in the 1960s, there was still that animosity towards, you know, a person of color in uniform. And he even said, like, he didn't understand what it meant, but when he got to his next duty station, he was kind of briefed as far as, like, yeah, that was a very dumb thing to do, because there were people in some of these backwoods places that if they saw you traveling at night, especially if you're traveling in uniform, they were going to run you off the road and kill you in uniform. So, I mean, those are the stories that would get passed along. You know, even if you weren't in the military, but there was stories of you don't travel at night through certain places. And it was one of those things that became generational. And it might not be that way in those certain areas anymore, but you don't want to be the one that takes the risk. You don't want to be the one that takes the chance and goes into, you know, a place that used to be a sundown town, and somebody that looked like you wasn't welcome, and you happen to go there, and now your family can't locate you. They have no idea where you are. So for a lot of people, it was actual history, actual real events. that were the cause of a lot of fear or a lot of anxiety. It wasn't necessarily a story that would be told that, like Bloody Mary, or if Candyman were in real life, a story like Candyman.
Well, and that's kind of what I was thinking, because I would think a story like Emmett Till, for instance, would be used in a way to teach people about dangers out there, whereas my mom tried to teach me about these headlights on a car, because I don't face those same issues because of my skin. So I feel like white people almost had to make up ways to scare children to keep them in line, whereas you definitely didn't have that growing up. You had actual history, like this really fucking happened and here it is, and like we can go there and whatever else. Like we just don't have that, because culturally speaking, white people have been the aggressors since they got here. I wonder if that's why.
Well, like I said, is that idea of I guess cultural exclusivity within some of the stories or some of the histories. But there's also the idea, like I said, if you break it down and get into specific ethnicities within Black culture, yeah, you've got those stories. So you can get into stuff that was based off of real life, like Marie Laveau in Louisiana or in New Orleans. And there's stories about her that aren't true, but you know that she was a real person, and you start to play around with these things that she may or may not have done, which are some really cool stories, about how getting people to fall in love with one another, or having political power, or the idea that, if you happen to go to New Orleans and you go to the cemetery where she is, there's the understood belief that if you know who she is, you should go visit her visit her grave and leave a gift. Because if you visit the grave, it's one of these stories that's out there. If you visit that cemetery, or visit her grave and don't give her a gift, you might have some misfortune that comes along. But if you do go and you leave her a cigar or some rum, you might have something good happen to you. So again, there's some things that link themselves to superstition, but then there's some things that, there's some historical connection to it that you take that little thread and you spin it out a little bit more.
I'm just picturing the guy who closes down the cemetery at night, like collecting all the cigars and rum and having a great time. And then, when people come to visit tomorrow, he reiterates the story so that you go get him some.
So we talked about the first Candyman, and the second one I liked a lot better. Since we're talking about New Orleans, I liked a lot better than the first one because there was a lot more depth to it. At least from my perspective, there was a lot more depth in Candyman Farewell to the Flesh, because it shows that long connection between the protagonist's family and Candyman, and shows that she's actually, why she has this connection with him, and of course, why this one professor that shows up to town on his book tour ends up getting killed by Candyman. It's because, he's talking about Candyman and spreading this story, and so he's keeping Candyman's story even more alive by writing the book about the incidents, and then going and speaking about it, and not necessarily making the connection as far as what could potentially happen to him, because he's one of these people, I don't believe in that shit. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, he's just profiting.
And then, and then Candyman takes care of him. Give him some royalties or something. But what you see in this film, which made me like it, was the fact that, despite the really bad special effects, but they were good for the time, was that you see what happens to Candyman. You see what happens to his character, at least in the history of him, and it doesn't give you that out of, well, he's only doing this in the projects. You see he's doing some of this. I hate to excuse what, the murders and all the other stuff that he's doing, but you see that he's doing this so people will know what took place, because it's one of the lynchings that people know about, at least from the movie, or the canon in the movie, they know about. And they kind of give him some respect because they're recognizing how brutal his lynching was. They cut off his hand. He was an artist, and they cut off his hand, but that wasn't enough. So they went and covered him with all this honey, and bees came in, stung him to death. And all these people that are sitting there watching him die are, it's not even a solemn event. It's kind of like, all right, cool, you're dead. We did it. Further than that, you get to see or at least it causes you to think more about the lynchings that haven't been recorded in that same way. I mean, to go back to when you brought up the Emmett Till story, that's probably the most famous lynching that takes place in American society, to a 14-year-old boy for a crime of or quote unquote crime of saying hello to a white woman. And of course, her story changed as I think within the last couple of years, where she admitted to lying about what took place. But the idea of the miscegenation of Candyman and his employer's daughter taking place, that was a cardinal sin. You're not supposed to mix, and you're definitely not supposed to have any evidence of it. And despite the fact that they were in love with each other, gets overshadowed because you had to keep the social norms and mores up. Because it wasn't just so much about the fact that she fell in love with him, a white woman fell in love with a black male. It was the fact that he impregnated her, and now you've got this quote unquote stain on your family name, because now you can't marry her off to anybody else. And the way that the daughter gets by is she does something that's very popular, and this is not in any way my way of giving a compliment to people like Rachel Dolezal, but the daughter passes for white, and she understands the security in doing that, because they're now in the South. They relocate to Louisiana, and to escape the story and the quote unquote shame of her father, or who her father is. But they go to the South, and she passes for white, which was a very common thing to take place depending on the color of your skin, and even the texture of your hair. So she was able to live within white society, not necessarily forgetting who her father was or who her mother was, or even forgetting who she was, but understanding the power that came with that, which was really great to include in this in that film. Because in the first film, they just say, well, he got the girl pregnant, and then they killed him. And you're kind of wondering, like, well, if he had a child, this legacy of his would continue somehow. He's gonna be immortal with the stories, but he's also gonna have immortality because he's gonna have family to remember him. But in that film, the great thing about it was there were so many people after that daughter. I think her name was Celeste or Cecilia or something. But after that daughter, so many other people tried to cover it up, including, the protagonist's mother. She's like, oh, no, we don't talk about that. In fact, she's dying of cancer and still doesn't want to come to terms with the family, doesn't want her daughter to know what's going on. She's pregnant by her husband and ends up naming the child after I believe it would have been her great-grandmother. But all these things are playing out to where you're wondering, like, damn, this is a really cool connection that you could include in this film to talk about the history and actually throw the history at people who would know the history of this region, of that time period, the cultural history that plays out there. So I thought that aspect was really remarkable in being able to include that.
So to jump in a different direction for a minute, Candyman is known for the bees. There's this great scene where he opens his mouth and the bees come out of his mouth. And I don't know if you know this, but Tony Todd wrote it into his contract that for every sting he got a $1,000 bonus. And he took home $23,000 because he was covered in bees. And I pulled up a quote just now so that I could read it to you. Tony said, "Everything that's worth making has to involve some sort of pain. Once I realized it was an important part of who Candyman was, I embraced it, and it was like putting on a beautiful coat." And that's so amazing to me. But so the other part with the bees, it's the thing that terrified me when I saw it. I'm not scared of bees per se. It was the number of bees. If it was one or two, that doesn't bother me at all. But the number of bees in the film all at once on him, that's what resonated with me as a kid. That scared me way more than the legend of Candyman. Did you have that as well or not?
No, because you're talking to a guy who laughed at the scene in My Girl where Macaulay Culkin gets stung to death. So I did. I sat there and I laughed at Macaulay Culkin because, apparently he didn't have any prep time. So
My Girl is one of my favorite movies. I just want to throw that out there because it's all about the scene where Veda's losing her mind that he doesn't have his glasses. That is such a powerful scene to me, and I love that. So there you go. A little something extra for our podcast.
But no, with respect to the bees or the amount of bees, I found it creepy, more creepy than scary. Bees have so many different things going on. I mean, that now being older than I would have been if I'd watched the film originally, I don't see bees the same way I would have seen them when I was a kid. I got stung a few times, but now I see a bee and it's kind of like, go do your bee business, dude. It's not one of those. Now, if there's a swarm, yeah, with respect to the numbers, I'm going to have a problem. I'm going to stay away.
I agree with that, but I would say a single wasp terrifies the shit out of me. So
no, it's got to be many, because I'm already thinking in my head that one sting, and I have to applaud Tony Todd for putting into his contract, or whoever put into his contract, the stinger clause, because that's great. I've been stung probably about 3 or 4 times, and no one gave me $1,000 for each time. It would have made a huge difference.
You need to be a better negotiator.
I know, but the idea of the amount of bees there, and then of course opening up his chest, or open up the jacket, and his chest is completely decomposed, and all you see are the bees. That adds another element to it, where unlike in some films, I referenced Nightmare on Elm Street earlier. This is a part where Freddy cuts himself open and you just see like slime and worms and all that kind of stuff. When I saw that movie as a kid, I'm like, oh my God, that's disgusting. That's gross. Now I see it, I'm kind of like, that doesn't scare me. But Candyman's thing, it's creepier for me. Not necessarily scary, but it's creepy because you're sitting there like, oh God, that's disgusting.
Well, and I think the look on his face adds so much to that as well.
The look on his face competes with probably the creep factor of the bees, because he's so serious and just almost like staring through you, not just looking at you, but staring through you, and almost to the extent of, yeah, I got all these bees. What are you gonna do? It's impressive because he's doing all this, and as an audience member, you're watching it and again getting creeped out, but the person that's in the film is scared for their life as this is taking place, and just thinking like, one, what the hell are the bees going to do? And then 2, how do I get out of this situation? And there is no escape.
So I do feel that the second one is a stronger film. And I think that the reason I feel that way is because it's about Candyman. The first one's not about Candyman. The first one is about a white woman and everyone around her dying until, of course, the end of the film. I feel like once the focus is on Tony Todd's Candyman, it becomes a stronger franchise altogether. I would even say going into the third film that I like the third one better than I like the first one. I do like that it brings it full circle. The end of the third one, basically, it's about stop believing in him. And they even test it, like at the very end, the main character does the Candyman thing in the mirror, and then he attacks, but you find out it was a dream because he's really gone. And as much as I hate dream sequences in horror films, it kind of works, it kind of doesn't, but it achieves the point of proving that he's gone because they stopped believing in him as a whole. Like 1 or 2 people can still believe, but it's not enough power to keep him alive. And I like that they brought that all the way through all 3 films. But overall, again, I just feel it's so much stronger once it's concentrating on his character instead of him being an afterthought.
And that's what you need. I mean, well, aside from keeping him alive, but to actually talk about him and actually have him expose more of himself in those films, either through the history of who he was, the artwork, which I thought was a great addition.
Oh yeah,
to show the portraits and everything that was there, and it even gets into like the family secret component. I don't want you kids going over to the slave quarter. Just the idea of when I was watching the film, as soon as the character said, "Oh, that's the slave," that used to be the slave quarters, and our parents would never let us go play over there. I'm thinking to myself, there's going to be some serious shit in that shit.
I know, that's like a giant neon sign that's flashing, foreshadowing.
Yeah, but the idea that you go so far as the brother understands to an extent of what's going on, and he wants to do something about it, and is going crazy because no one else, it's almost as if he's yelling and no one can hear him. And he's going crazy because of that. But even when he, I forgot who it was in the room with him who gets killed, but when he's trying to run away from this situation, because like, look, Candyman's not going to get me. I'm not going to get caught up in this. He gets shot, and then they blame him for killing the guy at first. And then the other police officer, the detective, sees the video footage and realizes, like, no, he wasn't killing this guy in the room. It was something else. And I saw that as a way of, at least for her character, oh shit, I have to believe in Candyman now. I didn't before. And I saw that as almost a way of Candyman coming back, because even though the family is, destroying the mirror, or at least, the character destroyed the mirror to get rid of him because that's where his soul was trapped. If there's another outlet for him, he can still live on. Which, again, was kind of a weird thing to add with the mirror, that's how he was there. But, the first movie, he's only in Cabrini Green because of the ashes. It was one of those things that the continuity of it didn't work for me. But if I looked at them as two separate films that are, based off the same idea, kind of like the Slender Man stories, it works. Because you can watch the second movie without ever seeing the first movie.
I think you would actually be best off watching them second movie, third movie, first movie. Because I feel like the first movie kind of hits that part that most franchises hit where they start dying off in the third one. And I think that you would have enough of an understanding of Candyman by that point that it might be a stronger film, because you wouldn't have to try to figure out what's going on. You'd have all this deep history from the second film particularly, and then what the third film builds into it with the flashback to Cabrini Green, so to speak. With that said, I don't know how much you know about the new version that Jordan Peele's working on. I'm
staying as far away from it as possible so I could just be interested in it without being biased one way or another. Other than the fact I'm going to watch it because it's got, it's Jordan Peele. I think Chris Rock signed on to produce it.
I am not totally sure on that part, but what I was going to say is I'm very interested in where he goes with it, because he wants to take on toxic fandom through Candyman.
Oh.
And I think that's so interesting. So he talked about how the fandoms have become this secondary antagonist almost to films. Like you saw it with Game of Thrones and the petitions to rewrite it, Star Wars, obviously, Ghostbusters with that backlash. And I'm very, very fascinated where he goes with that. I'm not sure how you do that as a movie, but I do trust Jordan Peele to do it. So I'm extremely fascinated with that. And I think that we won't end up with a story of a white woman causing problems and the focus being on her.
Well, and her black friend telling her, hey, maybe you shouldn't do this. I'm curious because, it's still far enough ahead where I haven't seen, and that's why I said I was avoiding stuff that was blatantly going to tell me what it's about. But yeah, it'd be interesting because even with, Marvel's Age of Ultron, way they kind of hit on the Frankenstein elements where Tony Stark is not listening and creates his creature that ends up becoming a monster. It was very interesting the way that they were able to excuse or explain how he becomes a monster. And it was all, he just went on the internet and saw all the news. He saw internet comments. He saw all this stuff. And so maybe, with that respect, maybe Candyman, if it's going to be about attacking toxic fandom, or looking at a potential, the comment section brings him to life and he starts going after people that way, or is it, it comes to you through your computer, or are we going to have something that's similar to the original as far as like he just happens to be in the room or happens to appear in the room and kills you that way? I'm interested now that that's the premise, to seeing where he's going to go that the previous one didn't. Is he going to get into some of the racial elements that were, I guess, overlooked or not expanded upon with the first films? Is this going to be, and you brought up the whole thing about going to the suburbs, is this going to be an issue within the toxic fandoms of going into those suburban environments, where if we're talking about a digital world, are we talking about going geographically in more than one place? It's just one of those things where I wonder, and I want to see what he does, where he goes with this. There's potential to discuss a lot of different elements, kind of like what he did with Us, and especially with Get Out. So I could easily see him doing, a great mash of horror and social commentary as he did with Get Out, but I think with more of the horror angle like he did with Us. So I'm hoping he goes darker with this film.
I absolutely agree. I think that it will also be interesting because it's being billed as a reboot. But if you're dealing with toxic fandom, I almost feel like there's going to be throwbacks to the others. And so I'm interested in how that would work. As always, it's Jordan Peele, and no matter what great thing I come up with, he will just destroy my ideas and do it a million times better. So I can't wait to see it. All right. Well, thank you for joining us once again on the Necronama.com. As always, I am James Sabata.
And I'm Don Guillory.
And we hope that you join us next week here at the Necronama.com.